too long we have suffered trial by media and those with hidden agendas. Let my fellow Australians judge me on what I say, but don't deny me the right to have my say. I am not a racist. Criticism is not racism. I am a proud Australian fighting for our democracy, culture and way of life. In 3 weeks from now, we will be honouring and paying homage to the Anzacs, ordinary Australians who didn't want to go to war and die. They fought for our freedoms, and our current serving defence men and women continue to do that, sometimes at the ultimate price. We can never forget that or take it for granted. Being held across our nation today was called out of sheer frustration from ordinary Australians who fear for the future of our nation and the mindset of our politicians who don't appear to be listening. We can no longer take for granted what's left of our freedom of speech or democracy. There are those lurking close at hand who wish to destroy all that is Australian and our freedom. If my voice goes, I do apologise. It is up to all of us not to shirk our political responsibilities. No longer can we rely on our government to look after our interests. Nothing worth gaining is ever gained without effort. You can no longer have freedom without striving and suffering. You can no longer turn your back and say it makes no difference. You can no longer cry ignorance. You can no longer say you don't have the time. The people who say this are simply saying they are unfit to live in a free country. Our country was once the lucky country, but now our unemployment rate is over 6% and much higher in rural areas. Job security is a thing of the past. Our recent free trade agreement with China will further erode jobs, with Chinese businesses bringing in their own workers, not to mention the highly secretive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which one nation believes will see more of our industries and jobs disappear. As a young child, I remember visiting farms and market gardens with my family. Fruit and produce, beef and dairying was a way of life for many Australians. Our governments have done nothing to protect our food bowl, and now farmers are committing suicide every week. Why aren't the media and politicians speaking a word of this? Hear me. If the city people don't support our farmers, we will be a country that cannot feed ourselves. We will be a country that relies on imported produce. A country which will be forced to eat contaminated and unregulated food, as we have just seen with imported frozen berries containing hepatitis A, resulting in over 20 Australians being infected. We must reclaim support for our farmers. Do you want China, America, India, Japan, or any other nation or its nationals buying and working our land? Then exporting the produce directed back to their country, with Australians having to buy it back from them. This would be on top of these foreign investors not paying their fair share of tax due to the 1953 Double Taxation Act. I know I don't. Jim Pillelli, the Deputy Commissioner of Taxation in 2010, said 40% of the 1,300 big businesses with a turnover of more than $250 million paid no tax on average over the past 4 years. Back in 2010, 40% of big businesses were foreign owned. I am sure that figure is much higher today. He said, being foreign owned helps moving profits offshore. It helps in creating tax-deductible loans in Australia which are used for payments offshore, away from the ATO's eyes. Some of the biggest offenders are Apple and IKEA, yet our government is now advocating to tax Australians for deposits they put in their bank accounts on top of raising the GST. We are taxed to the hilt. Enough is enough. Multinationals must pay their fair share of tax. In 1992, Paul Keating signed Australia up for Agenda 21, a United Nations document and not a conspiracy theory as the media and politicians would have you believe. For those who are not aware of Agenda 21, as known as Sustainable Development, it's about global land use, global education, global population control, and stripping people of property rights. It is about deciding how exactly you will live your life. Where is the freedom in that? An aspect of Agenda 21 is to privatise water. Let me draw Australians' attention to Section 100 of the Australian Constitution, and it reads, "The Commonwealth shall not, by any law or regulation of trade or commerce, abridge the right of a state or the residents therein to the reasonable use of the waters of rivers for conservation or irrigation." This has not been challenged in the High Court, but I believe Australians, under Section 100 of the Australian Constitution, have the right to water. However, under Agenda 21, Australian farmers will only be able to capture 10% of water in their dams. The rest must flow to the rivers and creeks, or they will be taxed. In South Australia, they're actually bringing in what's called a low-flow bypass system, where you cannot capture the water in your dams. It has to flow to the rivers and creeks. John Howard and his Liberal government separated land and water in 2004 to make it a saleable commodity. This was not done for any reason other than for profit and the grubby business of multinationals and big business to make money. What's even scarier is that they did this without a referendum. The Liberals and Labor parties pretend that they are in opposition, but we are starting to see that they are one and the same. Good governments are made by only good oppositions, and in Queensland and Australia we have neither. We must ask ourselves, if water is privatised, we would pay higher water rates or be stopped from using water unless we can afford to pay. Is the taxing of farmers driving up the prices of produce and the supermarket? It has to be a contributing factor. In the United States, the Republican Party are opposing Agenda 21 now. What are our politicians doing to stop it here in Australia? Our land must also be protected so that future generations will have the opportunity of owning their own homes and farming their own land. Did you know that land proportions as large as the size of New South Wales have already been sold to overseas investors? You can't buy land in China, you can't buy land in Japan, you can't buy land in Switzerland. The Philippines and Thailand have very strict guidelines as to foreign ownership. What the hell are we doing? We have our own Liberal, National and Labor governments been doing for us. Many Australians, especially those looking to buy their first home, are realising it will only be a dream and far out of their reach. Foreign investment is driving up prices, making our housing one of the most expensive in the world. Banks reap in the interest due to large loans, while Australian families struggle to keep a roof over their heads and food on their table. There is a place for foreign investment in Australia, but it is not come at a cost to you and I. Our government should be safeguarding our futures, not selling us out. Australia has opened its doors and hearts to many migrants from nearly every country around the world. Most have embraced the Australian way of life, culture and laws. Some are still trying to assimilate. Some never will or won't. want to. The majority of Australians live by Christian values, but Australia has had an open door policy to other religions practising their faith. Australia has opened up to letting Muslims migrate from their war-torn countries, but with their ever-increasing numbers, the cultural and religious differences have become more evident, including the impact it has had on Australian society. There are many peaceful immigrants of different races and religions, but in recent years, Australia has experienced more social incohesion than ever before, with migrants who are opposed to our way of life. The Cronulla riots was an unprecedented cultural clash, and I believe not the last we will see in our country. Terrorism has impacted on the world and closer to home on our streets. We woke up this morning to hear of 147 non-Muslim students murdered in Kenya by Islamist group Al-Shabaab. It makes me sick to look out amongst this crowd and think each one of us has a potential target on our heads by extreme individuals and terrorist groups. Many Muslim extremists are leaving Australia to fight for ISIL, an organisation that hates Western values and democracy, murdering innocent people who are both Muslims and Westerners to incite jihad war. It has been reported that approximately 400 young Muslim men have left Australia to fight for ISIL. ISIL have made their stance very clear that they hate the West and all it stands for. If those men have gone to fight our Australian citizens with dual citizenship, I call for their Australian citizenship to be revoked, are not listening. Simply raising our terror threat to high will not stop the terror threats against us. We need only look at England, the Netherlands, France and Germany, to name a few, that are now faced with street protesters, like we have in the back, wearing signs indicating threats to those who oppose Islam. Hello? Yes, I'm back. Surah 9, Section 5. Fight, enslave, pagan infidels wherever you find them and seize them. Ledger them in every stratagem of war. When 9/11 occurred in New York, Muslims were seen dancing and celebrating on the streets of Sydney. Mosques are flourishing across our nation.
Doesn't sound like a religion of peace to me.
Hello. We are to halal certification. nation. We only have 2% of Muslims in this country. What about the other 98% of us? I do not call on Australians to show that what they stand for with violence. We are not about violence. We are about democracy and our rights and have a right to have that say. Stand up for what you believe in. And I've never walked away from what I believed in when I first elected in 1996 and I got the support of the Australian people. I have continuously fought to win a seat back in Parliament, but every time they stop me because it is so in this last election when I lost by 114 votes because the counting was done incorrectly. But I didn't win that. But I've not given up. At the next election, Pauline Hanson's One Nation will be sending Senate candidates right across this nation. We can make a difference and we can change it if you've got the will of the people. I am so proud of so many of you that have come here today to be part of this rally. Take from it what you will, but it is nice to see. It is fantastic to see that you are standing here under the banner of Reclaim Australia.